All right, this one shouldn't be too long, but it's going to be a very important video. One of the things that has been asked multiple times on the free response part of AP tests is if they give you a set of numbers, or even sometimes just give you like the quartiles and the mins and max, and maybe a couple other things, they'll want you to justify whether there are or aren't outliers. So on the AP test, it's a big deal. In our class, this is a 6-point question on a test, just for the pieces that are involved. But basically, if you have a set of numbers and if you want to know if there is an outlier, there are two ways you can technically, in AP's eyes, decide if there's an outlier. The first one is if the point lies 1.5 times IQR above Q3 or 1.5 times IQR below Q1. Anything beyond those is considered an outlier. And that one's really important because that's the one we're going to use. And that's the one we're going to use because that matches our calculator. So if you're ever making a box plot on the calculator, like even this set of data right here, we can actually know before we run through the calculations to justify it whether we're going to have outliers or not. I do want you to know the other way that is acceptable to identify an outlier is if it's beyond 2 standard deviations from the mean. And we haven't talked about standard deviation yet, so that's the other reason we're not going to use this right now, but that is another way that you can identify an outlier. So, first thing is to just type in your numbers. Mine are already in here. And like I mentioned, one thing you can do to kind of help yourself is go to your plots, turn on a box plot. So turn the plot on, make sure you choose the one with outliers, make sure you have the right list, and then hit zoom 9 like we did in that other video. And there's my box plot. And we can already see, yep, there's an outlier because it's plotted separately. You can hit your trace button and you could find all these if you want. And then there, so we already know that this point of 22 is going to be an outlier. Now, you're not going to just have to answer yes there are or no there aren't and give them most of the time. You're also going to have to provide numerical justification. So in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is find IQR, which you can do by using trace. Q3 is 58, Q1 is 46. So to get IQR, we need to do Q3 minus Q1, which would be 12. Now you also could do stat calc, one var stats, calculate it, and scroll down. That's perfectly fine too. But we need the IQR first, and then we multiply by 1.5. The reason for why we multiply 1.5 is really just based on one of the first people to do a lot of work with data sets and statistics and graphs. He kind of tinkered with some different rules and tried some different constants in there, and 1.5 seemed to match the best with what he was seeing visually when he just kind of was judging graphs. So that's kind of what they call it a rule of thumb. It's not based on some law of mathematics, but it works pretty well, and that's what our calculator uses, so it's nice that those two are in sync. So I have my IQR as 12. If I take 1.5 times that IQR, I end up with 18. So then now to actually calculate outliers, we need to get two values. We're really kind of calculating two like boundary lines. So we're going to take Q1 minus 1.5 times IQR, which is 46 minus 18, which gives us 28. That's 2 points for just that step. Showing me in letters what you're doing, or showing me with the symbols like I'm doing Q1 minus 1.5 IQR. Then do the calculation, get the answer. And then we also need to do Q3 plus 1.5 IQR. So be careful with that. It's not the measuring from the median. You're going Q1 and lower, so Q1 minus, and we're going Q3 and higher. So Q3 plus 1.5 IQR would be 58 plus 18, which is 76. Now, these two numbers, you need to explain what they're there for. They're not numbers in our list. They're not the quartiles or anything else. They are the two boundaries that are deciding what are outliers for us. So there's kind of two different ways I think you can write this. One way would be to say anything less than 28 or larger than 76 is an outlier. And I think that's the most clearest cut. If you're like in the Graphite Conservation Society of America and are trying to write as little as possible, you could say anything not between 28 and 76 is an outlier. If you're right at 28 or 76, I would say that's not an outlier. It needs to be beyond that range. But then don't stop here because we haven't actually identified the outliers. So your last thing would be to say 22 is an outlier. So that's 6 points there. 2 for showing the work with letters and numbers. 2 for showing the work with letters and numbers. You don't need both of these, but you need to explain what those two numbers are. Otherwise, they're just like random numbers in the middle of nowhere you just calculated for fun and then give the final answer.